Welcome to the All Sorts podcast, where every episode is an invitation to explore something new.
We are so glad you could join us.
Today, we're strapping ourselves in, adjusting our radar, and taking a deep dive into a legend of Canadian aviation.
The Avro Canada CF-100 Canuck, Canada's first mass-produced fighter jet.
Ooh, I can already hear the engines warming up. Just the name Canuck evokes a sense of, rugged determination.
It really does, doesn't it?
A true guardian of the North. Now, to guide our flight path today, we've consulted a range of sources. We've got intel from the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, of course, and the ever-reliable Wikipedia.
We've also tapped into the expertise of the Canada Aviation and Space Museum.
The National Air Force Museum of Canada and the Canadian Aviation Museum.
Even a nod to the world of horology with Whitby Watchco's tribute to the Canuck. They've got a pretty cool pilot watch inspired by the aircraft.
We've got our flight plan, our sources locked in, and our engines primed. Our mission for this deep dive is to answer one crucial question.
Why does the CF-100 Canuck hold such a special place in both Canadian and military aviation history?
Buckle up, folks, because we're about to find out. Now, the story of the CF-100 really begins, I think, in the aftermath of World War II.
You're right. The world was a very different place. There was a sense of uncertainty, of shifting alliances.
And the Cold War was emerging as this, defining global struggle. Canada, recognizing the need to stand strong in this new world order, realized it needed to boost its military capabilities, particularly in the air.
Absolutely. There was a growing awareness of the strategic importance of having a domestic aerospace industry, one that could design and build advanced aircraft right here in Canada.
So not just relying on other countries for defense, but building their own capacity.
Exactly. And the Royal Canadian Air Force, the RCAF, they knew what they needed. A fighter that could handle the unique challenges of Canada's vast and often unforgiving landscape.
Okay, so what exactly were they looking for?
Think rugged, think versatile. They wanted a two-seat, all-weather fighter, something that could patrol those long distances up north, no matter the conditions.
And this was in the early days of jet fighters, right?
Oh, yeah. And nothing on the market at the time could really meet those specific requirements, especially the need for advanced radar and fire control systems. It had to operate effectively in, practically zero visibility and whatever crazy weather Canada could throw at it.
That's a tall order. So who are the brains behind this ambitious project?
The challenge was taken up by Avro Canada, and they assembled a team of brilliant engineers.
Names we should know.
Edgar Atkin, the chief engineer, and John Frost, the chief design engineer. These guys were instrumental in turning the CF-100 from a concept on paper to a roaring reality.
So how quickly did they move from idea to actually building the thing?
Well, the project got rolling in October 1946. Initially, they focused on developing a prototype, the XC-100.
The XC-100, got it.
Yeah. And a key part of this phase was a deal for 30 Avro Canada engines. Canada wasn't just building a fighter, they were developing their own jet engines, too.
Talk about taking control of your destiny. That's pretty bold. Did it work? Were the engines any good?
Well, the first prototype, the Mark I, actually flew with Rolls-Royce Avon engines, but that was temporary. They were always planning to switch to the homegrown Orenda.
Okay, so picture this. January 19th, 1950, Malton, Ontario.
A crisp winter day, I'd imagine.
And there she is, the CF-100 Mark I prototype, serial number 19101, gleaming in gloss black paint with those bold white lightning bolts, ready to take to the sky for the very first time.
At the controls, squadron leader Bill Waterton, an experienced test pilot on loan from the Gloucester Aircraft Company in Britain.
This was a huge moment, right? The culmination of years of work and planning.
Absolutely. A symbol of Canada stepping onto the world stage of military aviation.
But I know there were setbacks along the way.
Tragically, yes.
The second prototype, 18102, didn't fare so well.
It was lost in an accident in April 1951, sadly claiming the life of test pilot Bruce Warren.
That must have been devastating for the team.
It was a major setback.
Right.
They grounded the remaining prototype and went back to the drawing board to figure out what went wrong. They identified some key structural issues that needed immediate attention.
So it wasn't just a matter of mourning the loss, it was a complete reevaluation of the entire project.
Exactly. And it was at this point that they decided to fully commit to the domestically developed Avro Canada engines. It was a way of, I think, not just powering the aircraft, but also powering the nation's confidence in its own technological capabilities.
That's a powerful image. What happened next?
The first Orenda-powered CF-100 flew in June 1951, just a few months after the accident. And it was clear that this project had the full backing of the government. Cabinet Minister C.D. Howe, a real powerhouse in the Canadian government at the time, he actually directed Avro to make the CF-100 their top priority.
So no messing around. This was a national imperative.
Absolutely. And they moved quickly into pre-production, building 5 Mark II aircraft with the more powerful Orenda II engines.
I'm guessing one of those was the trainer variant.
You got it. The Mark II-T. Dual controls so instructors could safely guide those new pilots through the intricacies of flying this beast.
Okay, so we're moving closer to a fully operational Canuck.
And in October 1952, the first production model, the Mark III, takes its maiden flight. This version had the HG-33 radar, giving it that all-important all-weather capability, and was packing 8.50 caliber machine guns.
8.50 cals, that's some serious firepower.
It was, and they weren't taking any chances with its performance, and sent it down to Eglin Air Force Base in Florida for cold weather testing.
Florida for cold weather testing? That seems a bit ironic for a plane designed to patrol the Canadian Arctic.
A bit of a head-scratcher, isn't it?
Yeah.
But they wanted to push the aircraft to its limits, ensure it could handle extreme conditions. They also conducted comparative armament trials with the USAF, just to see how it stacked up against American aircraft.
Okay, so the Canuck is born, it's evolving, it's proving itself. Let's talk design. What set this aircraft apart from the others? Because, when you see pictures, it's got this very distinct look compared to, say, the sleek, swept-wing fighters that would come later.
It's true. The CF-100 was all about function over form. It was designed as a two-seater with a pilot and a navigator working together, which was essential for those long-range all-weather missions.
Makes sense. 2 sets of eyes are better than one, especially when you're flying in, like a blizzard or at night.
Precisely. And both crew members had ejection seats, a vital safety feature, especially those early days of jet aviation.
Always good to have an escape route.
Absolutely. The twin-engine configuration was another key element. 2 Avro Orenda engines, mounted side by side in the fuselage. This gave it the power it needed, along with a degree of redundancy.
So if one engine failed, the other could hopefully get you home.
Exactly. And it had an excellent climb rate, crucial for intercepting those potential threats quickly.
Now, we've touched on the radar and fire control systems, but those were really the heart of the Canuck, right? That's what gave it its all-weather edge.
Absolutely. The CF-100's radar and fire control systems were state-of-the-art for the time. They allowed the crew to detect and engage targets, even in those conditions where most other fighters would be completely blind.
So we're talking about flying through thick clouds, snowstorms, even at night, and still being able to find and track enemy aircraft.
That's the idea. This capability made it one of the most formidable all-weather interceptors of its era.
It's funny because you don't usually think of straight-wing aircraft as being particularly fast, yet the Canuck actually went supersonic. How did they pull that off?
It is surprising, isn't it? But it happened. December 18th, 1952, Squadron Leader Janusz Urakowski, Avro's chief development pilot, was at the controls of the Mark IV prototype.
This is the same Urakowski who would later wow the crowds at Farnborough, right?
That's him. But on that December day, he pushed the Canuck into a dive, and boom, Mach 1.10. It became the first straight-wing jet in the world to achieve controlled supersonic flight.
That's a pretty big feather in their cap. It challenged the idea that straight wings couldn't break the sound barrier.
It did, a real testament to the engineering and the skill of the pilot.
So the nickname Clunk, which, referred to the rather distinctive sound of its landing gear.
I've heard that.
Maybe wasn't telling the whole story.
Definitely not. Lid Sled was another nickname, perhaps less flattering, referring to its heavy controls. It wasn't as agile as some other fighters that had a very different mission.
Right. And speaking of missions, the Canuck's armament evolved quite a bit over time, didn't it? I know it started with those 8.50 caliber machine guns.
It did. But later versions, beginning with the Mark IV, started sporting these very distinctive wingtip pods. Each pod could carry up to 29 Mighty Mouse folding fin aerial rockets.
29 rockets per pod. That's a lot of rockets.
It was a serious punch, designed to take down entire bomber formations.
They weren't messing around, so the .50 cals were out, and it was all about the rockets.
Yeah, pretty much. The Mark V, which was designed for high-altitude interceptions, had even longer wingtips and an enlarged tailplane for better stability at those heights. And it relied solely on the rockets. They even considered a Mark VI with Sparrow 2 missiles and afterburning engines.
Oh, wow. That would have been something to see.
It would have, but it never made it past the design stage.
I'm also curious about those electronic countermeasures or ECM modifications. What were those all about?
So even after they were phased out as frontline interceptors, some Canucks got a second life fitted with ECM gear. Basically, they became electronic aggressors, simulating enemy electronic warfare tactics for training purposes.
Yeah.
Pretty resourceful, right? Kept these old birds flying a little longer.
Very clever. It's amazing how they managed to squeeze so much utility out of the airframe. Just to give everyone a sense of scale here, what were the key specs of the Mark V, the main production version?
Okay, so the Mark V was about 54 feet 2 inches long, had a wingspan of around 57 feet 2 inches. Sources vary slightly on the exact wingspan, and stood about 14 feet 6 inches tall.
That's a pretty big bird.
It was. And those two Arend 11 turbojet engines, each cranking out over 7,000 pounds of thrust, they could get it up to around 552 miles per hour. The range was impressive, too, about 2,000 miles.
Wow.
And a service ceiling of 45,000 feet. It could climb like a homesick angel.
Okay, so we've covered the design, the tech, the different variants. Let's talk operational history. Where did the Canuck first see action, or at least, active service?
It officially entered service with the RCAF in July 1952. The first unit to receive it was No. 3 Operational Training Unit, based in North Bay, Ontario. Their job was to get those aircrews up to speed on this new advanced fighter.
And I know it wasn't just flying around Canada, it was deployed overseas, right? Part of our commitment to NATO.
That's right. In 1956, 4 CF-100 squadrons were sent to Europe as part of one air division.
So right into the heart of the Cold War, what was their primary mission there?
Same as in North America, intercepting Soviet bombers. It was part of a larger strategy to protect the West. And those Canucks deployed to Europe were sporting a different look, by the way.
Ah, yes, the camouflage.
Yep. They adopted a British-style disruptive camouflage scheme. Dark sea gray and dark green on top, light sea gray underneath.
Blending in with the European skies. So the Canuck had two nicknames, Clunk and Lead Sled.
Two very different impressions. Clunk was kind of affectionate, a nod to the landing gear.
Right. But Lead Sled implied that it was, well, a bit of a handful to fly.
It did. But, the CF-100 wasn't built for fancy aerobatics. It was a workhorse, a heavy hitter designed to get the job done no matter the conditions.
Speaking of jobs, I read that the U.S. Air Force took a look at the Canuck during the Korean War. Were they thinking of adopting it?
They were looking for an all-weather interdiction and surveillance aircraft. And they did evaluate the Canuck, along with the British-English electric Canberra.
So what happened? Why didn't they go for it?
The USAF ultimately felt that the Canuck's range and payload weren't quite what they needed for that specific role. They ended up going with the Canberra, which became the Martin B-57 in UA service.
Interesting. It wasn't that the Canuck wasn't capable, it just wasn't the right fit for their particular requirements at that time.
Exactly. Now, in terms of international sales, Belgium was the only country to buy the Canuck. They picked up 53 Mark Vs. And funnily enough, their decision was partly influenced by those spectacular aerobatic displays put on by Surakowski, Avro's chief development pilot.
Wait, really? I thought we just said the Canuck wasn't known for its agility.
It wasn't. But Urakowski, he had this incredible knack for showing off the aircraft's hidden talents. He performed this maneuver at the 1955 Farnborough Air Show called the Falling Leaf.
I've seen videos. It's pretty wild.
It is. And it apparently convinced the Belgians that the Canuck was more than just a lumbering workhorse. It could move.
I guess never underestimate the power of a good air show. So the Canuck served for quite a while, exceeding its original design life, if I remember correctly.
Oh, yeah. It was built for about 2,000 flight hours, but some of these aircraft racked up more than 20,000 hours. That's some serious airtime. Its days as a frontline interceptor came to an end in 1961 when it was replaced by the CF-101 Voodoo.
The Voodoo was faster, more advanced.
It was, but the Canuck didn't just disappear. It soldiered on in a variety of support roles. Reconnaissance, training, electronic warfare, those ECM birds we talked about earlier. It was a real multitasker.
A true workhorse. Eventually, it was replaced in some of those secondary roles by the Canadair CT-133 Silver Star and the CC-117 Falcon.
And of course, its intended successor in the interceptor role was supposed to be the Avro Arrow.
Ah, yes, the Arrow. That's a story for another deep dive, maybe a mini-series.
Definitely. But that cancellation in 1959, it had a massive impact on the Canadian aerospace industry.
A story for another day, indeed. So, back to the Canuck. When did it finally make its last flight?
Officially retired from service in December 1981, and the last military flight was on February 10, 1982. CF-100 number 100-785 flew to the National Aviation Museum, what's now the Canada Aviation and Space Museum in Ottawa. A fitting retirement home for a true icon.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, let's quickly go over the different variants again.
Sure thing. We had the Mark I. Those are the two prototypes. The Mark II, 10 pre-production aircraft, including the Mark II-T trainer, then the Mark III, the first major production version, mainly with the machine guns. The Mark IV introduced those rocket-armed wingtip pods and some engine upgrades with the Mark IV-B sub-variant. And finally, the Mark V, optimized for high-altitude interceptions with longer wings and relying solely on the rocket armament.
So all in all, 692 aircraft were produced. That's a pretty impressive run from 1950 to 1958. And thankfully, many of them have been preserved, right?
They have. You can find Canucks in museums all across Canada, as well as in Belgium, the UK, and the US.
Any standouts we should mention?
Well, there's the Mark III-D at the Nanton Air Museum in Alberta. There's a Mark IV-A at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. And then there's the one we mentioned earlier at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, the Mark V-D. It's painted in that cool gloss black scheme, like the very first prototype.
It's like a visual echo of those early days. Beyond its military service, the CF-100 has really become a symbol of Canadian innovation, hasn't it?
It has. It represented a coming of age for the Canadian aerospace industry. It proved they could design and build world-class aircraft.
The Guardian of the North.
Exactly. And that legacy continues to inspire today. You've got companies like Whitby Watch Co. creating the Canuck Pilot Watch as a tribute.
It's remarkable how certain machines capture the imagination and become so much more than just, pieces of metal and technology.
They do, don't they? They become symbols of national pride, of achievement, of resilience.
Of course, we have to acknowledge that with any aircraft that flies for that long, there are going to be some accidents.
Sadly, yes. There were a number of tragic incidents involving the CF-100 over the years. It's a reminder of the inherent risks involved in military aviation, and we should never forget the sacrifices made by those who flew these aircraft.
Absolutely. So as we bring this deep dive to a close, what are the key takeaways about the Avro Canada CF-100 Canuck?
I think the first is that it was a remarkable achievement for Canadian aviation. It proved they could build a high-performance, sophisticated fighter jet right here at home.
And it played a vital role in Cold War defense, both in North America and in Europe.
Especially with that all-weather capability. That was a real game changer.
And the fact that it served for so long in so many different roles speaks volumes about its design and its adaptability.
It really does. The Canuck's a testament to the ingenuity and dedication of the people who designed, built, and flew it.
It's amazing to think it remains Canada's first and only mass-produced fighter jet.
And that raises a thought-provoking question for our listeners. Given the Canuck's success, what impact did the cancellation of the Avro Aero have on Canada's aerospace industry in the long run?
A question to ponder indeed. And on that note, we'd like to thank you for joining us on this journey into the fascinating world of the Avro Canada CF-100 Canuck. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the All Sorts podcast right here on YouTube.
And remember, there's a whole archive of past deep dives waiting for you wherever you get your podcasts.
You can also find us on X, Instagram, and Threads. We'd love to connect with you there.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never stop learning.
And keep those engines of curiosity humming.